Hello and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is a Ukraine War Update Extra video, giving you extra nuggets and tidbits to get your teeth into to give you a greater understanding of the war in Ukraine. I'm in a very good mood today. Why? And this is just a slight sidebar for my regular viewers. Going off Ukraine here a little bit. I've got a manuscript for a new book that is out imminently, and we've just started to get loads of feedback and endorsements from world experts in the area of astrobiology, astrotheology. In fact, the former NASA historian, who is foremost writer on astrobiology, has endorsed the book magnificently. So really excited that actually got validation for the work that Dr. Aaron Adair and myself have put into a new book. And that'll be out shortly, so I will shout about that probably for about 30 seconds on an upcoming video. It is about philosophy, but it's about what would happen if we discovered intelligent alien life out there. I'm not talking about getting invaded by aliens, although that is part of it, but how would that affect what we thought about religion and so on and so forth. So really interesting, cool book with a bunch of science and a bunch of philosophy, and I love it. So anyway, that's great feedback for that. Anyway, whatever, that's why I'm in a good mood. That's why I'm smiling, not because war is horrible, and I don't want to smile about that. Right. This proves that I listen to what people say in my comments and read them. Goodness me, do I read them? I spend too long reading them. Someone said, well, can you tell us something about Rosatom and why that's not being sanctioned? So Rosatom is the Russian state-run nuclear energy organization, but it actually works as a funder for foreign nuclear projects. But it's not sanctioned. Why is it not sanctioned? Because it's a really big player, and you would think otherwise it would be sanctioned. I mean, it's a prime organization for being sanctioned. The West hasn't gone after Russia's nuclear energy. Here's why, says CNN Business. Russia's state-owned nuclear energy monopoly Rosatom, which exports and enriches uranium as well as builds nuclear power stations around the world, has been in control of Europe's largest nuclear power plant in Ukraine's Zaporizhia region since Russian forces seized it a year ago. Despite, and then it does another little bit of chat, but that's enough preamble. Despite what has been described as a rising risk of a mistake or breach of safety protocols at the Zaporizhia power plant, the repeated calls by Kyiv for sanctions on Rosatom, the Russian company, remains largely unscathed, although the United Kingdom sanctioned its top management and several subsidiaries last month, and Finland terminated a power plant deal last May. Experts say Rosatom remains protected by the vital role it plays in global nuclear power and the fact it can't easily be replaced. The problem is a Russian's dole worth of interlocking dependencies, says Paul Dorfman, chair of Nuclear Consulting Group and a long-time advisor to the UK government and the nuclear industry. To start with, Rosatom is a key exporter of nuclear fuel. In 2021, the US relied on the Russian nuclear monopoly for 14% of the uranium that powered its nuclear reactors. European utilities bought almost a fifth of their nuclear fuel from Rosatom. According to Dorfman, the European Union has made little progress since weaning itself off Russia's nuclear industry. Now, I guess the difference here, and this is me talking, is that with oil, it's relatively easy. I say it's not easy, but it is relatively easy compared to nuclear to say, right, we're not going to get our oil or our gas from you. We are going to sanction you, and we're going to get our oil and gas from someone else. Because it's not just a case of supplying uranium, which, interestingly, has very few suppliers around the world compared to, say, oil. But it's the fact that these are technologies that require very great expertise that isn't easily replaced. So I can't just go, I'm not going to buy my oil from you, I'm going to buy it from you. It's like, I'm not going to get my nuclear expertise from you. I'm going to get it from, actually, no, I need to get it from you because you're one of the few ones. Or you're who built my nuclear reactor. You're the only people that know really how to run it. I'm not going to get that expertise from you. I'm going to get it. Right. Okay. So if I don't get it from you, my reactor is going to blow up. Okay. So it's a little bit different. Rosatom also provides enrichment services, accounting for 28% of what the US required in 2021. It has built numerous power plants, nuclear power plants around the world, and in some cases financed their construction. At the end of 2021, almost 1 in 5 of the world's nuclear power plants were in Russia or Russian built. And Rosatom is building 15 more outside Russia, according to Columbia University Center on Global Energy Policy. That's a lot of money involved, and Russia will be getting a lot of money for this. Kasper Szylecki, a research professor at the Norwegian Institute of International Affairs, says the cost of building a nuclear power plant is so high that it can only be financed by governments, and in some cases, they can't even afford it. In those cases, Rosatom has often stepped in, offering credit lines guaranteed by the Russian government, and in some cases long-term contracts to provide fuel for or even run the plant. Szylecki, who co-authored a recent paper on Russia's nuclear industry, says the most extreme of these kinds of deals is the build, own, operate model. It was first used by Rosatom with Turkey's Akkuyu power plant, which the corporation is building, fully financing, and has committed to operating for its entire lifetime. Such dependency can trump other considerations. For example, Hungary has been the European Union's most vocal opponent of sanctions on Rosatom. It is also one of only several EU countries that rely on nuclear energy for more than 40% of their electricity, and it has a long-term financing deal with Rosatom to build a nuclear power plant. So it is difficult. I understand why you can't so easily sanction something like Rosatom, because there are very few alternatives. When it comes to running nuclear power plants, that organization is already running, but also just supplying uranium or enriching uranium. There are relatively few capabilities for that around the world. That is a little bit on atomic energy and Rosatom. So there you go. This is to dip into the vast wealth of information on volunteers working in Ukraine, and I've actually spent very little time talking about them. So here's a little nugget on the water needs in Donbass and the provision of water by certain volunteers. So the water needs are incredibly high, says a volunteer from the UK. Russians destroy critical infrastructure, leaving civilians without power, heat and water. Volunteers bring drinking water to towns in Donetsk Oblast, and they are under fire. So let's have a little look at this.
Water that's been filtered to projects called aqueducts, which takes clean drinkable water that's been filtered from Kramatorsk, not from the supply itself, but from our suppliers there who filter it, clean it and make it drinkable. And we provide that to the residents of the city of Seversk. Seversk has approximately 2,000 people. Even before the war, their water situation was not exactly brilliant. They had connection to the water supply, but that's been cut off. The water needs in Donbass in general are incredibly high. They are drinking from rivers, they are drinking from contaminated wells. The wells themselves are the product of 400 years of very aggressive salt mining in the region, but also they are low yield, so they don't supply enough water to feed that up, to keep that number of people going. So what they need is a steady, scheduled drops of drinking water, which is what we provide.
So Seversk is essentially shaped like a bowl. To the north you have front line, to the east you have front line, to the south you have front line. Basically it's hard to get in and out, and therefore we feel that it's just harder for government or NGOs to bring in aid. There's a lot of humanitarian aid coming in, but very little water.
And so we go to Seversk twice a day in our converted ambulance, which is ahead of us. And we organize with the local leaders to make these scheduled drops. Before then, we were doing Chasiv Yar. Chasiv Yar for a while had its water supply cut off by Russian fire. The Ukrainians are very, very good at this point in the war in maintaining their infrastructure. So the Ukrainians repaired it, and that kind of put us out of a job, which we're very happy to be put out of a job. We always are. And so we moved on to the next project, which is Seversk. Originally, we were paying for it. This is out of pocket. We've started fundraising, and we've managed to get a lot of individual donations, which is helping us not necessarily expand, but certainly to maintain the fuel, water, and the maintenance costs on the vehicle.
So, go and look at aqueducts and support them. It looks like really important work. And there's not enough that could be said, I guess, about the volunteers who are working tirelessly, both in Ukraine and around the world, to help Ukraine, to help this conflict-ridden country maintain services, maintain levels of X, Y, and Z, and to rebuild and to survive. And so just really important that we remember that. Okay, moving on now. This is just a short video that I thought was interesting. I don't know when this is from or particularly where, but it was just a video I came across of Ukrainians coming across themselves Russian vehicles here. Dobry den. And here we have supply vehicles, but they seem to be somewhat abandoned. And this is, I'm a big fan of recycling anyway, right? And kind of renewable and stuff like that. And when I look at this, I think, oh yeah, they could get these back up and get these back on the front line themselves, or using them themselves. So it's just a case of repairing some tires there. I'm sure that APC is well within the realms of being repaired, put up to spec, and then put back on the front line. You're thinking there's so much need for these vehicles of all types, from supply to APC to IFV to tank, that when you come across vehicles like this, you're thinking, yes, Ukraine needs this, and this is an easy gain. It takes time, and they might need to be sent to Czechoslovakia or somewhere, but it's fantastic when they do come across hauls of vehicles like that, though I don't know when and where that was. Okay, moving on to talking about snipers. Reporting from Ukraine had a really good video on snipers in Bakhmut. Let's dip into his work.
And seem to be very cautious with their commitment of significant resources. Ukrainian forces have also started releasing a lot of combat footage with snipers. One of the videos shows how a Ukrainian sniper is hunting on Russian reconnaissance groups in the fields around the Chromova highway, where he revealed a group consisting of 5 troops, waited until they got together, and eliminated the whole squad. But most snipers are currently located inside Bakhmut. In a recent interview, one of the Ukrainian snipers in Bakhmut said that they usually work with targets at very close distances of around 300 meters, although in some areas it is still possible to work with targets more than 1 kilometer away. Being shot from such small distances means that the enemy has basically no chance of surviving. Right now, Ukrainians are mostly located on the territories of huge residential areas with high-rise buildings.
This is what I was talking about in my map update earlier, which is that the Russians will find it increasingly difficult to take ground in these areas because there are higher buildings where you can get really good lines of sight to advancing troops from. As you can see here, the high-rise buildings that the Russians now control are, far fewer than the Ukrainians. So the Russians have taken to hitting these buildings with a lot of artillery in the hope of taking out the troops that are in there, sniping away and whatnot.
While Russians are predominantly located on the outskirts, where there are only one-story houses. This setting greatly favors Ukrainian snipers and allows them to have significant control over the approaches and support the units that are engaging in close combat fighting. With an abundance of potential firing positions, many Russian forces get trapped inside the houses with no chance of running away. The only thing they can and usually resort to, unless communication is blocked, is shelling the whole house if they can identify it. That is why the Russian pace of advancement is usually equal to the pace at which the artillery can reduce one residential area after another. Despite the heavy artillery fire, the commander of Ukrainian forces in Bakhmut once again visited Ukrainian positions inside the city and told them.
And that's a bit of footage I referred to earlier today. I think it's quite striking that you can see these projectiles coming into Bakhmut on the thermal imagery. But it's interesting he's talking about the speed that they can advance is the speed with which they can flatten the buildings that are causing them problems.
Despite the heavy artillery fire, the commander of Ukrainian forces in Bakhmut once again visited Ukrainian positions inside the city and told everyone to use the fortified infrastructure of the city for defense as intelligently as possible and aim to inflict disproportionate losses to the enemy. The Ukrainian president has also recently paid a visit in the Bakhmut direction.
So I think that's the key there, disproportionate. The way that Ukraine are defensively operating around Bakhmut allows them to cause disproportionate losses to the Russians. And you get pro-Russian voices saying, "Oh, how can the Ukrainians how can they have fewer losses than the Russians here?" Well, actually, it's things like this. It's using targeted, because they have fewer pieces of ammunition. They use them arguably more intelligently and more efficiently. So it's making sure that each munition counts, each piece of ordnance counts. It's making sure that, they use Excalibur, they use guided munition a lot more than the Russians do. It's sitting in defensive positions and waiting for waves of Russians to come at you. That's going to cause them more losses than you. You might cede some territory, you might lose troops, but you won't be losing them at the rate the Russians do. So, yeah, we are seeing, as he mentions, lots more footage of Ukrainian snipers. Here, it's interesting. It's just someone's normal house, just like this is now a war zone. Every room, and look at that, it's just incredibly sad, isn't it? But that is war, and he's got quite a substantial sniper rifle there. Fairly significant shot on it, as you can see. That will do some serious damage. That's a Czech ZVI or ZV1, I'm not sure. Falcon 12.7mm bolt action bullpup anti-material rifle, and the bullpup refers to the handle and the trigger situation. In fact, I might go and find you details of that. So here it is. Bullpup firearm is one with its firing grip located in front of the breech of the weapon instead of behind it. This creates a weapon with a shorter overall length for a given barrel length, and one that is often lighter, more compact, concealable, and more maneuverable than a conventionally configured firearm. Although some people are against that. The SA-80, I think, in the UK original SA-80 was very harshly criticised before they changed it up around, and partly to do with the arrangement of the bullpup configuration, and it depends on where they position everything, so on and so forth. Anyway, there you go. I was talking in a video earlier in my news one about sort of drugs being used on the front line, and this came from the Ukrainians that has been quite significant. That's quite widespread. And I talked about smoking as well. So no, we don't promote smoking, says the Euromaidan press. Cigarette smoking may be hazardous to your health, but in war and after battle, a cigarette isn't just a habit. It soothes nerves, stops the tremor, and helps distract. After victory, when we return home, we'll stop smoking, say the fighters. I had noticed how many Ukrainian soldiers smoke, and yeah, it must just be that you just need that calming. Goodness knows what it feels like to be on the front line. I'm sure we've got former soldiers and people who have fought on the front line viewing this. I know some of you have been in the armed forces, and I don't know whether you've been on the front lines, but you will know how stressful it must be. Now, talking about these drug claims, are drugs making Russian soldiers act like zombies, says a Forbes asks a Forbes article. Waves of hapless Russians attacking Bakhmut are being mowed down by their defenders, some seemingly just walking to their death. They're like zombies. You shoot them and more come constantly, one Ukrainian soldier told AFP in November. Another Ukrainian soldier, speaking to CNN, also compared recent attacks to something out of a zombie movie, describing advancing Russians climbing over bodies of their fallen. Everywhere videos show Russian soldiers staggering around slowly, failing to move out of the way even when grenades are falling around them, and that's a hyperlinked claim there. While one Ukrainian describes watching Russians move like molasses under bombardment. What's going on there? There are a number of possible explanations. Many Ukrainians are convinced that Russian soldiers are drugged. The Russians have some serious drugs. They have no motivation to fight, and they're given some euphoric stuff, says a Ukrainian soldier interviewed by Butasov Plus, describing fighting off 4 waves of attacks by Russians who did not seem to have any idea what they were doing. Truly, they are under some kind of influence, he says. It looks like very, very likely that they're getting some drugs before attack, says the soldier talking to CNN. The idea of combat drug to enhance fighting performance has a long history. The Nazis used millions of newly invented amphetamines to their issued them to their troops in World War II to give them the stamina for lightning war. The Allies made more cautious use of new drugs. Britain's RAFs issued wakey pills containing benzodrine to bomber crews, but these were only to be used in extreme circumstances with stern warnings about misuse. The US Air Force has used go pills and no-go pills to help aircrew handle fatigue and disruption to their daily rhythms, but even these have been controversial. The Russians have long accused Ukraine of using combat drugs and even claimed to have discovered laboratories producing them, claims which have been easily debunked. Just as Russia has made claims about Ukraine starting the war and targeting civilians and using cluster bombs, this might be another case of Russia accusing Ukraine of something it does itself. But it goes on to say there is no direct evidence of this taking place, and there could be other things to explain this. It could be vodka, which is itself a drug, right? And the Russians do have a history. They used to, in fact, have vodka that they gave on a daily basis to their staff, a bit like the Royal Navy with their rum in the old days, so on and so forth. But it says that also other explanations could be given, such as this coincided a lot with the cold snap. So it could be moving like that being a case of having hypothermia, not being able to think straight because you are so cold, all these kind of things. And so it's not definitely happening. There are claims that Ukrainian troops found Russians with benzos in their pockets, the benzodiazepines. These are prescription drugs used to treat anxiety. Street benzos are illicit drugs and are similar but can be far more dangerous. So, there's that claim. I mean, there are plenty of newspaper articles. Here's a Business Insider talking about the same kind of thing, and questioning whether they are taking drugs and whatnot. So it's interesting to consider this. I don't know if it's definitely happening, but it wouldn't surprise me at all. Goodness, if I was on the front, if I was a Wagner convict, where you're dead if you run that way, you're dead if you run that way, and you're dead if they drop stuff on top of you, I'd wanting to be dulling my sense of despair. So it wouldn't surprise me at all. Something interesting to consider, I guess. Right, let's have a look at something else here. There's a couple of bits of footage I want to show you. Indeed. Right, this first piece is looking at how Russians are hiding a large amount of military equipment under a bridge, which is actively used by civilians. This is in February 2023. And you can see the amount of equipment that is under that bridge, quite significant there. And both sides it can be seen. And for obvious reasons, it's quite a wide open space, but it's covered. And so it's a useful place to give protection to your vehicles. And if civilians are driving over the top, you're less likely to hit it, you might argue. But you could also argue that is definitely a viable military target, irrespective of the civilian vehicles, and that's the horror of war, I guess. So that is the Russians hiding vehicles here. Now, I don't know if these are being hidden or they're driving, but this has come out in the last 24 hours. A secret underground tunnel, it says, through which Western military equipment gets to Ukraine. This is a lot of equipment as well. See if I can play it without the music. Hey, success. And one assumes it is indeed Ukrainian equipment. You have some of that pixelated camouflage, which does indicate possibly that it is Ukrainian, and this is new footage, not footage I've seen before. I don't think anyone's claimed it's not. Now, the question is, because I've been wondering, this is a big question for you to think about. I've been thinking about it. What happens when you get all this equipment into Ukraine, sorry. So let's go and have a look at a map. Okay. You are being given an absolute bucket of equipment from different nations, and it's all going to be coming in via Poland, pretty much, or Slovakia. over to the west, so Poland, Slovakia, possibly from Romania as well. So this equipment comes in. Now the Russians are going to be looking at satellite imagery. They're going to have collaborators operating inside Ukraine. There are spies in Poland. They've put cameras up on roads and railways in Poland that have been found out. 5 people, I think, were recently arrested for doing that. They want to know where all this equipment is so they can hit it. So what do you do with this equipment? Because you obviously need to get it to the front line because you've got an offensive. You're Russian, right? Where are they going to do their offensive? We'll know where they're going to do their offensive when they start collecting all of their mechanized equipment into one general area. Now, in order to do an offensive, so say that you are going to do an offensive in Zaporizhia, you will need to have all of your offensive equipment in Zaporizhia. Say you're going to really hit out from Orikhiv to Haliopole. So this area, right? You're going to attack from this area. All of your equipment needs to be in that area, right? Because you're going to do an attack. You can't have like some of it out there, some of it over there, and then right, we're going to attack tomorrow. Well, we don't have time to get from there to there, so you might spread it around to some degree, but at some point, it needs to be collected around where you're going to attack. And even if it is around that whole area, the Russians will see that it is there and know that you're going to be attacking, somewhere concerning this area in Zaporizhia. Likewise for anywhere on the front line, and there are two issues there. One, they know where you're going to attack, and two, they can hit collections of these things with cruise missiles, with S-300s. They're just going to throw everything at the Ukrainians. So the Ukrainians don't want to accumulate equipment there until the last minute. But then the Russians are going to see them in convoys traveling around Ukraine before then and up to then. And even now, where are they keeping this equipment? One option is tunnels. How many tunnels are there in Ukraine? Where can they keep these things safely? But I think that's a pretty clever place to keep them because they are not going to be able to be hit by the Russian missiles. But still, there's too much equipment to just store in the odd tunnel here and there. I think this is something to consider. I'd like to know what your thoughts on this are. How do you safely get a massive load of equipment and troops to the front line in such a way that A, the equipment is safe, B, you're not telegraphing where you're going to be attacking from in terms of where your equipment is and where your troops are? And those two issues, I think, are really difficult to try and solve, as I say, without telegraphing everything to the enemy. Anyway, that's enough from me for at least this first one. I might do another extra today. I don't know about timing, or I might have to leave that tomorrow. It's just a slightly shorter one, and I said I've got so much content. But there you go. You will see it when you see it. Thank you for your support. Really appreciate that. Thank you for your fantastic comments in the threads below my videos. It's amazing. I'm honoured, truly. Anyway, take care. I'll speak to you soon.